Okay, the last thing we really need to do before releasing our course is obviously try and find any problems that are hiding away and remove them. So this is what beta testing is all about. And some people like to post their courses for everybody to play. Other people, like myself, just work with a few people and iron out the problems that way privately. Uh, but anyway, I'm going to go through some of the more common problems that beginners are likely to let sneak into their course. We've all done it. And to this, I'm going to have a look around this recently released beta course called Silver Springs by JF Harris. And he's kindly allowed me to use it in the video. So hopefully I'll try and find a few things and point them out. The video is going to be a little different to the others because I'm just going to leave this recording. I don't know how long it's going to take me to go around this course, and so there'll probably be a lot of editing involved, and it may be that I have to spread this beta testing over more than one video because it might get a bit long. So one thing with this course is it hasn't been scene blended, so I shall be dealing with scene blends using another course a bit later. But anyway, let's have a look round. Now, probably the first thing to look at is sharp edges. Almost everybody leaves sharp edges somewhere on their course by accident, so I've dealt with sharp edges before and how to alleviate them. In fact, probably I've dealt with most things that I'm going to cover in this video before, but I'll just run through them again as I find them. Sharp edges are going to cause shadows and ugly straight lines on the textures, and they're also going to cause unnatural lies because they're going to pull the terrain from a smooth curve into a more straight lined edge. So you'll get very unnatural lies if you land near a sharp edge, so they're best removed. And the way to find them, we simply go to Hull, and instead of all edges, if we tick sharp edges, we'll be able to see them. And straight away I can see there's quite a few sharp edges that have been left here that shouldn't be here. Because they're all highlighted in pink, and we just need to change them back. And there's some on this actual T. Now, these ones are not going to cause any problems at all because they're on a flat piece of land, and if you've got sharp edges on a flat piece of land, they won't actually cause a problem, so you don't really need to remove them, but I would just remove them anyway, just to make it look neat and to get in the habit of doing it. But they won't actually show up if I put the camera on it on this T. We won't actually see anything where the sharp edges are because the land is flat there because it's a T. We could well see the sharp edges on some of the others. Some may show up, some may not. They won't show up so well on these low resolution textures, but when you retexture it with high res textures, you'll tend to see the creases and lines a lot more if you've got sharp edges. And also edges that haven't been turned correctly. You can see here we've got very oblique edges. They shouldn't be like that, and they will also cause lines and shadows, especially after you've seen blended. It'll cause problems as well. So really want to turn any edges like this, remove any verts that have sneaked in close that are causing them. I should turn on the verts display, no, the hull display, and we can see what's going on. Now we know there's a problem here because we've got a vert which is creating these edges, but there's no edge coming out here, which there should be, because the edge has actually been turned and is crossing there. Now It's an easy job to turn the edge. Just highlight it, click turn, and hopefully it will turn. There's another one there. We can add inverts, terrain paint them in to get some of these verts sorted if they're at oblique angles. We've got a shadow on this fairway here. You can see there's a strange shadow on the side of this fairway. Now that will be caused by a sharp edge or an odd vert. Well, we know it's not a sharp edge because we would see it because I've got sharp edges turned on. So there must be an odd vert there or an edge, and there's the oblique edge. If we turn that, that's probably what was causing it. We've got a vert very close there. That's likely to cause a shadow because again we've got these very oblique angled verts, so you don't want verts that close. What you do have to remember is if you move any verts or turn any edges, the terrain will actually change as well, the slopes of the terrain. So if you've got any planting on, I've got the planting turned off at the moment, but if we have planting in the areas that we correct, such as here, if I turned, say, this edge, this tree could end up floating or sunk into the ground. So we have to use the technique I showed in a video previously to move our planting, which is basically just selecting the planting. My computer hurries up. There we go. If I select the planting I want to deal with, we need to be in the XY axis and just grab one of the plantings. I haven't grabbed it there. I'm not on move. I need to be on move. So I'll undo that. Select move. And if we just move it just a fraction and then back to where it was, any plants that are floating, because we've moved the terrain, will snap back onto the ground again. So that's the way to make sure all your planting stays fixed to the ground the way it should. You'll need to do that for any area where you turn an edge or add more verts in to correct any problems. So let's go back to the highlight sharp edges, and you can see there's literally hundreds of sharp edges all over the place here that shouldn't be here, that's creating a very ugly shadow here. You don't see it further down, but you'll see it on the top cam. People will see this ugly shadow. It might not look too bad at ground level, although you might see the lines. I have to turn the hull off again to see them. It's all a bit fiddly trying to show things, but I don't know whether they'll show or not on this because it's a rough texture and it's quite blurry. You probably won't see the creases, but as I say, you'll see them worse when you put better textures in. You'll see the lines that are being caused by these sharp edges. There we can see that's a sharp edge shadow being caused here. I select that edge. You'll see, yeah, it's actually on this row of sharp lines here. So if I unsharpen it to how it should be smooth, you'll see it's created a nice curve now, which is more natural slope. But like, as I say, this tree might be floating slightly now, so you will need to select the surrounding plants and just move them very fractionally horizontally to make them snap back to the ground. So sharp edges and close verts. We've got a mess of verts here where the terrain paint has obviously painted in more than one vert and it hasn't been removed. So anywhere where there's oblique angles, such as this edge here, it's going to create problems and it needs to be turned. To create more natural slopes. Alright, I should turn sharp edges off. On the hull, go back to all edges. So that's sharp edges. Texture names is another easily fixed problem, but a lot of people forget. They add custom textures and instead of being called rough or fringe, they'll be called all sorts of strange names. I don't think this course has them. Oh yes, it does. It's got a sand texture called Sand J. Now if we land in that bunker and the texture is called Sand J, it will say we're laying in Sand J. Well, that will look very silly, so we need to come in and just change the display name. We leave the actual texture name, that can be called anything for reference, but we don't want the display name to be called the same, so we just save it as sand or bunker or whatever it should be, and then when we land in it, that's what we'll see when we're playing the game. It will just say sand when we lie in the bunker rather than Sand J. So that's texture names dealt with. Hole boundaries, that is something that we need to make sure are correct. If we look at this red lines here showing the hole boundaries, we need to make sure that they're outside the fairways. If they cut across through a fairway and the ball lands on the fairway outside the red line, it won't fall into our statistics of a fairway hit because it's outside the hole boundary. So your statistics will be messed up. So you need to make sure all the boundaries of the holes are outside the fairway. This is coming very close here. I think it's probably just about okay. Again, this boundary is coming perilously close to this fairway, but it could be that these are all okay. I haven't checked the course, but the way some of these are quite tight, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some hole boundaries on this course that need adjusting. There's one. We've got a hole boundary here, and this part of the fairway, if the ball lands here, it's on the fairway, but it will not be recorded as such because it's outside the hole boundary. So we'd need to go to plan, adjust shape, and select the hole boundary, and we can drag these points around to make sure our boundary is actually outside the fairway. And again, down by this green, we've actually got the green outside the hole boundary as well, which is not a good thing. So I'll just pull these. So that's hole boundaries. Clones are another common problem with trees. So what we need to do is make sure we don't plant the same tree next to each other, because it'll easily be noticed if you've got 3 or 4 trees all the same standing next to each other. Now, I did notice some clones when I was testing this course. I can't remember where they are, but there were quite a few clones in places. A lot of clones can't be avoided. There's a typical clone there. If we look down towards this green, this tree and this tree are the same, and they're standing next to each other out in the open. You can just see the two trees are clones. Now, you can't avoid clones on a course. Obviously, you're using 20 or 30 trees or whatever. There's going to be hundreds of swaps all over your course if you've got forests. Now, these are clones, but they're not quite so noticeable because they're in amongst a bit of woodland. I'd still prefer not to have clones like that close to each other. But sometimes, if it's densely planted like this, the only clone that's showing up here for me is this horrible shadow on this tree. It's probably a stock tree, and it's got this nasty triangle shadow on it of dark that you just see a row of them because it's just a noticeable thing. Now, I would make a custom tree and actually edit that shadow out so it wasn't on the tree, and that wouldn't be a problem. That's the way I'd deal with that. But that's the only problem with forested plants, is if they have something distinct like an odd shaped branch and you just see rows and rows of these things like the shadow. The other parts of this tree up the top, although it's cloned here, it's not that noticeable that it's a row of cloned trees. If you take away this dark mark, you probably wouldn't notice that they're all the same tree because they're all forested together and quite natural looking. And the same here, there's 3 or 4 trees all the same planted, but they blend in and don't look too bad. But when they're on their own and they're standing next to each other, you can't miss them. And if you had 4 of these trees in a line, you just see a row of clone trees. So I would swap out one of these 2 trees here because it's very obviously a clone, and simply select it, go to planting, go to select, pick your tree that's a clone, change it to another tree. I don't know what trees are used on this course, so I have no idea what to change it to, but you can flick through, find a tree that looks okay to change it to. When you're happy, you need to update the tree, so you'd click update. If you don't do this tree will be still and it won't have a shadow. So click update, go to currently selected images, click OK, and that will just update the tree so it'll behave like a normal tree and you won't have any problems. So that's the way to swap out any noticeable clones. So you'll tend to find the clones more when you play testing, and usually when you're watching rather than playing. As I've said in previous videos, I send computer players around to do a lot of my testing. That way I can just watch and spot things. When you're playing, you won't spot the clones so much. When you're watching, you'll spot them far more easily. So I tend to send computer players around and just look around, and if anything stands out as being a clone, an obvious clone, I just note it down on a piece of paper where it is, and then come into APCD and swap it out.